We've got a treat for you. We're talking skincare and sustainability through innovation, with an incredibly intelligent founder doing her part to transform the beauty industry for the good of people on the planet. Plus, today's founder will provide some of the cutting-edge marketing tips and tricks recommended by top psychologists and neuromarketers to build a viral brand. Welcome to Confessions of a Founder. I'm Allie Berger, and each week we dive deep into the stories, challenges, and triumphs of successful entrepreneurs and the lessons they've learned along the way. Serena Advani is the founder of Seadrop, a zero-waste, waterless skincare brand. Serena launched the company in 2023 and hit lightning in a bottle. Her products have been featured by the Today Show, InStyle, Women's Wear Daily, Fast Company, and many more, alongside major influencers across your social media feeds.
Serena, it's an honor to have you. Welcome to Confessions of a Founder.
Thank you so much for having me.
One of the big things that happens a lot in the entrepreneurial space when you first start out is that it feels like everybody wants to give you advice along your journey. Some of it's great, some of it not so much. So what is the best advice that you've ever received as a founder that you keep coming back to over and over again?
Yeah, so that's definitely so true, especially when you're building in a category that a lot of entrepreneurs aren't as familiar with. In my case, building in beauty, building in skincare is very different from building in tech, where a lot of the investors and advisors in entrepreneurship tend to be experts in. To give you a little bit of context, Seadrop is reinventing skincare as water-activated tablets instead of liquids to benefit your skin and the planet, and our waterless form allows you to freshly activate your skincare right when you use it in zero-waste packaging, so it's also better for the planet. I've always known that that concept makes sense because I'm Indian, and in South Asia, a lot of the skincare that I grew up doing and my ancestors grew up doing was powder-based. And I knew that it worked because I had those same recipes myself when I was younger. So when I started the concepting and I started talking to investors and advisors, a lot of the advice I was getting was, first, that it's not possible. I kept hearing that it's not possible to do skincare in this anhydrous format and have it work better than the liquid counterpart. I knew, because of, again, my beauty background and my personal heritage, that that's not true. And I realized you can't take every piece of advice that you get too seriously. The second piece of advice that I got, and I know this is kind of answering maybe worst and best together.
No, it's big.
The second piece of advice that I got was from a tech entrepreneurship advisor. And I remember them telling me that if you're a startup, you need to launch with an MVP as quick as you can and then fail quickly. In theory, that makes sense for a lot of companies. That makes sense for even concepts of companies, like on brand messaging and marketing and ads. But on product development for a skincare brand, for something that emotional that you put on your face, that's honestly just bad advice. I'm really glad that I learned not to take that advice too seriously, because that advisor was nudging me to launch with a stock product that I could put on the market very quickly, test my marketing and iterate if needed. But my instinct told me that launching a product that is actually not that great, doesn't feel that great on your skin, might cause reactions, whatever it may be, something I don't feel comfortable putting my brand name behind, would be honestly far worse than launching slowly and taking a little bit extra time to perfect your formula when, again, we're in an emotional category and the advice that you hear from every advisor really doesn't apply to every category in every industry.
So taking your time, moving slowly through the process, making sure the product is perfect for the market, all those things are smart and make sense for the beauty space. What is the most unconventional way that you've gone about business that might not make sense to some, but that's worked really well for you?
Yeah, so I guess unconventional, there are a lot of ways that we've been doing things unconventionally. First of all, trying to do skincare in these water-activated crushable tablets is unconventional to begin with. So I guess one thing I'd note is that when it came to even formulation, because we had such a clear vision on wanting to reinvent skincare in this format, instead of going to one of the bigger manufacturers that works with indie brands or a formulator that you might have heard of if you've worked in the beauty industry before. I had to go about this in a really scrappy way where I cold called more than 500 formulators to get to the right, cosmetic chemist who could build this product well and build it in this new format. So I think that we're doing things in a pretty unconventional way. We weren't able to work with the traditional skincare manufacturers because at the end of the day, they only work with creams, lotions, gels, products that are honestly up to 95% water. And when you're reinventing something or creating a new category or building out a new category, sometimes you're going to have to do things in a more unconventional manner.
500 manufacturers. That's a lot of cold calling, and I would imagine a lot of no's and frustration. How have you been able to keep the grit that you have and the drive that you have? Where does that come from, and how has that presented itself in this process for you, like you mentioned?
Yeah, it's so funny you mentioned that. I always say that if you're going to start a company, you have to be so insanely passionate about what you're building, or you're going to want to give up all the time. And I say that because I kept hearing no so often. Rejections are never fun, even in smaller settings, but hearing rejections more than 499 times was pretty demoralizing. And I think what kept me going is just honestly faith in the concept and faith in the product, because it, to me, is a concept that just makes sense. To me, skincare that's water activated just makes sense. Skincare that isn't stored in single-use plastic just makes sense. There's no reason to. Skincare that you can bring with you through TSA just makes sense. I remember thinking, I have so much faith in this concept, and I know that it works because it is part of my heritage. Like, I grew up mixing turmeric and chickpea flour and sandalwood in my kitchen with my mom growing up, because those were the recipes that were passed down for the generations in my family. So I also knew that it worked, and I had that emotional attachment to it. And I'll say what keeps me going is just knowing that the concept that we're building not only can have a really big impact on the planet, but it just makes sense. And I was so passionate about it that, it kept me going through all the rejections.
I can just see you, like, I'm picturing a young Serena with her mom in the kitchen mixing everything up. I would imagine that's a huge part of obviously where your passion comes from. But how did you know that this was worth, or your love for skincare was strong enough to want to transition from it being a passion and something you do at home to expanding into a business?
Such a great question. I often get asked if pursuing your passion as a career can crowd out that intrinsic motivation and enthusiasm that you have for that topic. And I think it's a really personal decision. In my case, I found that I get so much energy from working in this space. And again, it's all emotional, but it's something that I love. For me, my background was actually not at all anything related to beauty. Before, when I was in college and high school, I thought I was studying cognitive neuroscience and business, and I thought I was going to go into either healthcare or tech or fintech or something more traditional, especially something more traditionally accepted by the South Asian community. Again, Indian parents nudging you into medicine. It happens. And right after I graduated college, I started out as a management consultant, where I was put on that random walk of different categories, different projects, different industries. And my first project ended up being in construction equipment manufacturing. Nothing wrong at all with that category, but I kind of realized if I'm going to be working that hard and putting that much of myself and my time and my life into my career, I'm so content driven that it really matters to find something that I'm passionate about. And right after that project, I actually ended up cold emailing everyone at my firm who worked in consumer retail and specifically beauty. And I was lucky enough that someone staffed me on a project in the space, and I ended up focusing my time in consulting on consumer and beauty PE diligences, which I loved. I loved getting to understand the category. I realized that in my case, turning that passion that I've always loved when I was a kid into a career made a lot of sense, and it brought me a lot of energy. And that's what led me to my job at Estee Lauder afterwards, where I got to learn about how it works on the industry side. And I also learned about the importance of dehydrating that skincare and why it matters to sell skincare and waterless concentrates, why it matters on the packaging side and on the formulation side, on the preservative formulating side when you don't have water in a product, how that can be so beneficial. So anyway, to sum it all up, I found my fit in my first job. I did not know what I wanted to do when I was 16, and I haven't been that laser focused, as a child on the beauty industry. But it definitely has now felt like home and it feels like the right space for me to be building in.
Coming from the consulting world and the corporate world, such different ways of living and working that don't work for a lot of founders, but that's a huge transition and leap to take if you haven't been a founder before. When did you know that it was time for you to be a founder, and what did those first couple steps look like to get to where you're at now?
Yeah, I started exploring the concept in 2021. And honestly, that was when everything just kind of clicked. We were we're still honestly in the middle of the pandemic, and I had a lot of extra time at home. And I was sitting there with my mom and my grandma making these face masks. And the concept kind of clicked because when I was working in beauty, I learned that skincare is 90% water. I knew that. But then when I was sitting there at home making these masks, I was like, wait, this literal product that I've been using since I was 5 could be the solution to not only the packaging problem in beauty, where we produce 120 billion units of single-use packaging every year. Instead of that, why not try and reinvent skincare the way that I've grown up doing it? So that's kind of how that concept came to be. And the first step that I took to validate if this was worth my time was actually those cold calls, trying to find out if I can validate with the cosmetic chemist, with the formulator, if this is an actual possibility. And luckily enough, after that call 500, I found a really phenomenal cosmetic chemist who was able to bring the concept to life and prototype it and give me faith that the dream isn't just a dream, it's something that's chemically viable. That's when I knew that this would be something worth pursuing.
Lots of tests have to happen before you get to the point of actually creating a product, whether or not that's samples, to your point, in skincare, maybe not until you're ready with the formulation. But I know in the tech world, a lot of the time, we have to make sure that people actually want what you're selling before you go about creating and putting all this money into something. When did you know that you had product market fit, and how have you tested that along the way?
Yeah, so part of it, big fan of constantly validating product market fit. And it's something that I'm constantly revisiting, even now that we've launched. It's something that you can always get a little more granular on or a little more broad based on, depending on what stage you are in your life cycle. But I would say that it started with a lot of consumer outreach and focus groups and individual interviews and surveys. And again, I came from the more structured consulting world. So having those frameworks that I've already been working with that I can map onto my specific category and my specific company was really helpful. We ran 2 surveys of over 100 consumers in our target set. And we interviewed, I want to say it was over 150 consumers with one-on-one interviews and focus groups. We had a couple interns on board, and we were really able to understand skincare purchase behavior and the emotional drivers of trying out a new product. Through that product market fit research, I learned that, for one, consumers don't care as much about sustainability as they say they do. On surveys, for example, they might say they'll try out something because it's more sustainable, but in real life and in these focus groups, we were learning that they really don't care. And as sad as it is, it's just good for us to understand as we're building out our true product market fit. What they do really care about is something that works really well and leaves their skin really hydrated. So, having clinical testing and having that really good understanding of performance-backed skincare over anything else was helpful. And then in our case, what we really found in our product market fit research was that travel was a really great way to get trial into our brand. And we found that as we're getting more and more niche right now, for example, we're really focusing on micro segments like pickleball players, tennis players, golf players. We're looking at flight attendants. We're looking at even chefs who might have busy lives, nurses who want something they can travel with or throw into a bag without fear of it leaking. And the reason I'm explaining all of this is what I learned from all of those interviews and all of that user research was that the product market fit might not be what you expect it to be. I personally thought it was going to be more sustainability focused at first. I thought it was going to be more kind of like portability focused at first, but it turns out it's all around travel as the entry level product market fit piece. And then, what I would say is that we just didn't stop doing that after we launched. We did another survey over the last couple of months. We've kept those focus groups going. We're constantly trying to have one-on-one conversations with creators, with consumers. And I would just say that it's something that should be fairly ongoing because you never want to rely too much on your instinct as a founder that's so close to the product.
You bring up such an important point, and it sounds like some of this probably comes from your neuromarketing background. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit more, but talk to me a little bit about the methods that you have used that have worked that you could recommend to others to really understand the psychology of the consumers that you're after and how to make sure that something is a good fit or as close to a great fit as possible before you invest more money into something.
Yeah. So I know I said you shouldn't trust your instinct too much, but at the end of the day, trust it a little. You have a vision, and that vision is something that you have so much faith in. So don't lose sight of your vision and change it too much, because you can get advice from a lot of people. So I always like to preface it with that. The specific tools that I recommend as you're trying to build out that strategy, I guess one really important one would be on being really thoughtful with survey design. That means not just putting in questions because they get you good answers that you can put in a pitch deck, but framing them in a really artful way that you're getting actual insights instead of just doing a survey for the sake of doing a survey. That means making sure it's not too long, because people don't like taking long surveys. That means understanding how to frame questions in a way that are easy to not only complete, but also interpret. For example, in one of our interview questions, we could ask, do you care about sustainability? But that doesn't really get us the level of insight and the emotional understanding that we're looking for from a psychology perspective that we really want. Instead, we asked a pretty complicated question, honestly. And we asked, do you consistently recycle any of the following? And we listed out like 30 different things you could recycle, maybe it was 10 different things you could recycle, not too long, as I mentioned. And one of those items was soda cans. Another one was pizza boxes. Another one was black plastic bottles. And we basically had these items listed where what we found is the consumers who really do care about sustainability would not be recycling things like black plastic bottles. And it turns out the reason for that is black plastic in the US tends not to ever get recycled if you try to recycle it, because the conveyor belt at the recycling facilities in the US is black, and the lasers can't pick up on that plastic. So we found that like the true extreme enthusiasts would mark that on the survey, but they might not mark themselves as a true sustainability enthusiast correctly on that survey at the same time, because sometimes you have to get at the emotional, really true like understanding of people's intentions rather than what they self-describe as, where in the moment, anyone might put, I'm really sustainable, to feel good about themselves as they're checking that box on a survey. So that's kind of what I mean by being really deliberate and thoughtful with your survey so that you can get actual insights from it rather than doing it just for the sake of saying we're running a survey. The second piece I would say is when it comes to focus groups and interviews, again, it's not about doing it. It's about how thoughtful you are when you're doing it. And it's about making sure you don't have too many people in each focus group, that you have really thoughtful questions, but you're willing to move with the flow of the conversation if you're getting to interesting insights when someone's talking. And it's also, again, about creating a safe space so people are not afraid of saying how they really feel, even if they know that's not what you're looking for. And the example I'll give there is I had one focus group that I ran in 2022 where a consumer actually told me, and again, she knew what I was building. She knew I was building in the sustainable skincare space, but she actually told me, listen, if I'm going to be honest, I like throwing out my plastic bottles. And I remember feeling like, that's so interesting. Like you like feeling like you are putting a lot of plastic in the landfill. And she goes, I hate to say it, it's just emotional. I feel like I used up skincare and I did something good for my face. That's why I feel pretty good throwing away skincare bottles. I don't feel good throwing away plastic bottles. So I was like, that is such an interesting insight that I never would have pulled if I were trying to frame this as a focus group where I want to hear what's right for the brand. Instead, creating a safe space where you can really get true insights can be so valuable. And that's how we were able to refocus our messaging and marketing around quality, travel, and on the actual freshly activated skincare concept that is designed to work better than a liquid cleanser. Like that's how we landed on that piece on formulation and messaging, because otherwise we wouldn't know if we were only hearing what we wanted to hear.
This is beautiful insight. Thank you so much. And this is the most important part, honestly, I think, of what I have learned as well in my consulting career. We talk a lot about in the fashion space. Well, if people similar to Sephora, when you shop online, don't people want to see if people can see what their makeup looks like on their face, don't they want to see what clothes look like before they buy them? And the reality is, no, psychologically, we nitpick ourselves apart. And so it actually deters from you wanting to buy a given product rather than helping to move you further in that purchase. And I think when you're able to do the right or set up the right parameters or learn how to ask the right questions through strong frameworks to put any given consumer in that safe space like you're talking about, that's where the magic really happens, is in those uncomfortable environments where someone might not want to tell you what they really think, but that's what you need as the founder to have the right next step forward or the best next step forward. You've taken a clear stance through your business in being good for the environment as a zero waste company and also creating products that are clean and safe for users, which is not necessarily the case for many fashion and beauty brands out there. So can you talk to me a little bit about how you've been able to prioritize your mission and your values and what that process has looked like, good, bad, or otherwise, in order to maintain your central mission and focus?
Yeah, I think that at the end of the day, it's not about government. It's not about even what the consumers demand. A lot of the vision of these companies comes from the companies themselves. And if you're an entrepreneur as a founder, it comes from you. And that's why in my case, when it came to building Seadrop, I wanted the company to be mission driven around our impact on the planet from day one. But it's not because someone told me it has to be that way. If anything, it makes life a lot more difficult. And I think that it's just important to set your metrics on what really matters to you and what impact goals really matter to you so that you can do those well, instead of trying to boil the ocean and do everything all at once. In our case, using that same metaphor, we were actually actively trying not to boil the ocean, where we have a lightweight product that is low carbon energy intensive to ship and therefore doesn't increase ocean acidification to the same level as liquid skincare. And we also have that biodegradable refill packaging that is designed to disintegrate so we don't have plastic in our ocean. So we really are very ocean centric. But at the same time, those were the goals that I chose to focus on above all else, noting that there's always room to expand the impact focus down the road. And I think that trying to maintain that laser focused vision on what really matters to your brand will really help, because it'll be very hard to do it all. And setting what matters to you as a personal goal for the brand will trickle down into every fabric of the company as you're building it.
Why is sustainability so important to you?
It's not, and you know what? I'm going to be really honest. It is not even that important to me personally. I am not the most eco-friendly person on the planet, and I am not building Seadrop for the most eco-friendly people on the planet. I am coming at this from the perspective of someone who's been in the beauty industry and seen how much waste we generate from just so much product that tends to be stored in plastic. That's really what it comes down to. It's just a lot of plastic, and it all ends up in our landfills or in our oceans. And that just bothers me, because we're not only polluting the planet that we have to live in, but we're polluting the planet that, multiple generations down are going to have to live in. We're inheriting a world where we are ingesting, a credit card's worth of microplastics a week.
Yep.
There are so many of these effects that are not only going to affect me, but they're going to affect everyone around me. And I feel some sense of responsibility being in the beauty industry to at least try to have a net neutral, hopefully net positive impact on society with the products that I'm creating. So part of it is just from the industry lens, noting that I have an opportunity to make a really big difference as someone creating more product. At the same time, I will say I am not the most perfect, sustainable consumer out there. Sometimes I buy other product. I have this lip oil. This packaging is probably not ever going to get recycled, but I really like the lip oil. And at the end of the day, I'm the kind of consumer that loves beauty products and I love skincare. And I'm not, living a completely zero waste lifestyle. I wanted to create a sustainable product for people like me that aren't going to be 100% zero waste. That's incredibly difficult to do in this day and age in the West. At least it's not possible. But I wanted to give consumers an opportunity to incorporate something that is good for the planet without compromising on anything. You're not compromising on quality at all. You're not compromising on ingredients or efficacy or price. The whole point was to have a product that allows you to just reinvent the routine that you know already while feeling good about yourself without sacrificing really anything. So again, sustainability was important to me from the industry perspective, noting that this is a way for me to move the needle, but I am not creating this or expecting that anyone is ever going to be perfect. And this is just one way for us to make a small difference that we can feel really good about in our daily routines.
That's such a fresh and realistic perspective because it is really hard as a consumer. So much of the onus is put on the consumer to know what products are good for you and not. And that's constantly changing. On top of it, to know what it's put in and how you need to get rid of it and all of those things. So I love your perspective of taking the reality of what it means to be a day-to-day consumer, not stripping away any of the value that you want from your products and how much you want to love them, but making it a little bit easier mindlessly to help the planet, regardless of whether or not that was your main intention to use the product.
Yeah, definitely. And the way I see it is, at the end of the day, consumers aren't going to demand sustainability. I, as a consumer, don't demand it from the brands that I shop from. But if brands can reinvent products to work better than their counterparts that aren't as sustainable, and the sustainability is a byproduct, the zero waste refill product is a byproduct of just a really unique format for freshly activated skincare, then why not? In that case, it's a no-brainer. In that case, to me, it just makes sense. And that's what keeps me going and building something in that sustainability space here.
We oftentimes see the rare rocket ship, startup, unicorn, whatever you want to call it, take off. And those are the homogenous stories and headlines that you often see. But we know as founders that no two founder stories look the same under the hood. So what has your path to profitability looked like as a founder?
Yeah, I think that there are so many different ways that brands are building. And I think that in my case, I mean, you've got some brands that show up and they're like venture backed and they're able to scale by pushing into meta ads, for example. Like we haven't done that. It's been a lot scrappier in how we're building out that outreach. And I will say the way that I'm doing it is in a very like high touch way of building the brand. Again, this brand is it's founder led, founder driven. A lot of it is just from a vision that I had a couple years ago. And I really wanted to make sure that consumers who are buying from us understand that, and they actually have that chance to understand our story in a more high touch way. One way that we've been doing that is actually reaching out to content creators and to influencers and to consumers on socials and having one-on-one conversations with them. And by that, I literally mean I have a 15, 20-minute conversation with them, explaining the story, explaining our mission, hearing more about their background, because that's what I want to understand, the consumer background and the story behind the people that are trying our products. And it's been extremely high touch. There are days where I'll do that for 8 hours, and it's not only really energizing for me because I'm finally understanding one-on-one, like who really buys this product, who really likes this product, but it's also a really helpful way for me to scale and be really targeted in, again, those micro segments rather than focusing on a broad reach that you might get if you've raised a lot of venture capital and can just focus on running ads to everybody because, you know, in this case, you want to build with a smaller segment and branch out later. And I think that strategy has proven to be a lot more effective for us too.
High touch in terms of conversations, what else does that look like? What does high touch mean for you and your business in order to scale?
So I think that's a big part of it. A lot of it is also, again, as you scale, as you bring on teammates, it's really being really clear on understanding like what the brand vision is and why we use the language that we use. So I would say, and I know every founder does this as well, but trying to really be prescriptive with the brand values and like writing it out in a deck, having something really clear that you can then transfer off if you bring on new people, or also as your team grows, you can't be the one doing everything. So even though right now a lot of the values feel like they're in my head and they're obvious if you get to talk to me, like what the point of the brand is, I also went through and wrote it all down because that should be something that you can easily pass on. And it's not just design direction, it's not just a brand book, but it's like understanding the values. And then the other piece is where I think it's important to be high touch. It's customer support emails that come through. Like I will go through and respond to a fair number of them myself, even when it came to packing out the first orders. Not that I recommend you do this all the time. We now have a warehouse, which is so incredibly helpful because it could take a very long time to ship orders myself. But I went and shipped out a couple myself for the first few orders that we had when we launched in 2023. And that was honestly really helpful because now I'm understanding every aspect of how this company runs. Again, when it came to the supply chain, like I was in contact with every supplier and really understanding, getting really granular on how everything operates. Because again, as a founder, if anything breaks, it doesn't matter who broke it. It's on you. And I think it's the same principle if you're managing a team at a large company. If anything happens under you, it's kind of on you, and a good manager takes responsibility. So that's kind of what I mean by being really high touch. And I think that I will say in a more scrappy mindset, which we definitely have here, you're more likely to get super hands-on and involved in every aspect from legal to ops to marketing for a brand like this one. And I think that has been the most rewarding piece of this because I get a really clear understanding of what we're building and why we're building it.
One of the biggest challenges as a founder is taking that idea from your brain. You talked about it with your brand values, right? You might know something and you can articulate it all day long, but it takes putting it down and passing it along to other people to really build the right culture and community around you. How have you vetted the people that you've brought in, whether that be co-founders, if that's a thing that you're considering, or advisors or employees, and made sure that those are the right people to work with? And what have you learned about that process?
No co-founders, no like full-time employees. We have a couple contractors and we work with third parties like our warehouse, cosmetic chemists and manufacturers. We're working with other people. And I think this one is really industry dependent, category dependent. In my case, what I've found is it takes effort to find the right talent, and it takes a lot of vetting them, like taking the time to really vet the talent that you're working with to make sure that you're on the same page on values, on mission, and on work quality output. What I would say the most important thing when you're at a mission-driven brand or you're in a fun category like skincare, which at the end of the day, the whole point of it is to make people happy. I think at the end of the day, the point of skincare is to make people happy. And I think that's a pretty nice goal. It feels like a net positive on the world when you put it that way. And it really does just brighten people's days. So what I found that the best filtering mechanism is finding people who also agree in that basic, understanding that, we're building something. At the end of the day, yes, there are all these great impacts on the planet. There's all this stuff that's amazing, for your skin. At the end of the day, they get that this just makes people happy. They're excited about skincare. They're excited about the concept. Then they have to validate that they have the right talent and the right skill set to add to the team to back it up. They have to, obviously have to be like good at the job if you're gonna get hired. But at the same time, what I found the number one guiding light in picking the best people to have on my team is passion, especially again in this category where it's based on understanding that you're making people happy. It's a fun goal to be working towards.
A lot of it is happy and fun, of course, but the founder journey has a lot of ups and downs too, as we both know. What is the biggest challenge that you've faced so far, and how have you had the resiliency to overcome it?
Yeah. Oh my God, I can think of a lot of things. I have some specific stories that are just related to the entrepreneurship challenges. And then I've got some that are a little more broad and emotional. Maybe I'll start with the broad one and then move to the more specific example of just the tough things that come up as an entrepreneur. The broad one is that even though you control your own schedule and people assume that as a founder, you can take as much time off as you want, you really can't. You are investing your whole life and identity, in my case, into this brand, and it is so impossible to turn it off. I think it's a skill that I'm constantly working on, and I've really gotten a lot better at compartmentalizing so I can go out to dinner and not be thinking about work, or not be like actively working. But I think that the piece that's really tough about being a founder is the thoughts are never really going to go away because you're constantly thinking about your to-do list. You're constantly thinking about your brand. You're constantly thinking about how to make it better. And I think there are a lot of industries where you're constantly mentally engaged, like one part of your mind is focused on work all the time. But I think that there's no industry where that becomes more apparent than in entrepreneurship. So that's one piece that is definitely a challenge that every single entrepreneur I've talked to has expressed as a similar, concern that they have. But then again, the other side of it is you've got some specific challenges that come up that are just unique to being an entrepreneur. Again, at the end of the day, it's helpful to put everything in perspective. And at the end of the day, you're not working in a hospital. This is, again, skincare. It's not the end of the world if things don't work out according to the right timeline or whatever. But there are still many crises that come up when you're a founder that nobody talks about what's going on behind the scenes. To give you context on one, right before we launched, this is a couple months ago last year, we had 2 weeks before our launch party for friends and family. We were going to have over 125 people there attending. People were flying in. We had scheduled the date, and 2 weeks prior, my manufacturer gives me a call and says, hey, the powders are not flowing through our tablet press correctly, and we might not be able to press this in time. And I remember being shocked. I remember it was a Friday afternoon. We're sitting there. I was actually outside in Manhattan walking around. And I remember thinking, how did we get to this point? We're launching in 2 weeks. This is the day everything is supposed to ship to me. And we can't even get the product going through the tablet press. Like, what's going on? We've done sample batches. Everything worked well. We don't really know what's going on. And that day, I had to become an expert myself in powder flowability, because after I got off the phone with that manufacturer, I started reading up scientific research papers on powder flowability. I started cold calling people who were experts in the space, professors. And then I actually started cold calling people who worked in pharmaceutical tablet pressing and in the powdered milk industry, people who were actually working on baby formula or just general powdered milk for other industries, because I figured they might know more about powder flowability as well. Again, really niche scientific topic. Turns out I'm really grateful I had that science background because I really had to speak the language. And by that evening, I ended up getting a call back from a professor at Purdue who I'm still so grateful for that quick call back. He ended up spending an hour with me on the phone, and it turns out he is an expert in powder flowability. He gave us really great advice on how to regranulate and then press our tablets without everything sticking into that machinery. And we were able to press it out in time. Everything arrived in time for the launch, and that's how we were able to scale and, build everything we've built today. And it's all of those little stories behind the scenes that no one will ever know about. Like, I didn't bring that up on the launch party. You don't want to say, oh, we just had this whole situation 2 weeks ago and we sorted it out very last minute. You don't really want to lead with that. But those are the kinds of stories that now I feel more comfortable sharing that are happening behind the scenes that a lot of founders are going through as well, but don't feel as comfortable with sharing.
Powdered milk, that's such a creative thought process around how to find the right person to help you. I would never even come up with that. How a lot of what you're talking about, though, are expensive experts often, and being able to afford all of your product up front to start shipping out before you've sold anything. Where did you find the capital to create Seadrop initially?
Yeah, so we haven't raised outside capital. That's why we've been so scrappy, and we've been bootstrapped to date. And I will say, so for example, those experts are normally so expensive. Trying to go find those professors, we didn't pay for any of those. They just actually answered out of the kindness of their hearts. Honestly, it was very, very sweet of them to spend that much time with me, because as you know from consulting, if you're going through GLG or Alpha Sites, you're going to end up paying $2,000 for that same call. So I will say that there are a lot more people who are willing to help you when you're in that scrappy founder phase than you realize. And in that case, they were so talented and so helpful, but again, not going through that more traditional route that you might expect if you come from bigger industries. And then the second piece is on the actual manufacturing. We were also lucky to not have terms that required us to pay everything up front, which can be really, really helpful for a small brand. So I think that when it comes to managing a business, especially if you have physical products and you're going into retail, really being clear on the terms that you're signing onto is so, so important, because that can make or break a company, especially in skincare or in CPG.
That's great advice for people who might be cash strapped that want to be able to start the company of their dreams. Thank you for being so authentic and honest about that. One of the other ways that many of us have to be authentic with ourselves along this journey is that we are expected as founders to be ideal leaders all the time. You just talked about always being on, but we're humans, we're not robots. So how do you account for the humanness of Serena day to day going through this process?
Yeah. So, I think that to me, when I have a team of like interns right now, freelancers, I really try to still be that leader and still be present when I'm with them, no matter what. And it's exhausting, but I think that that's more of a value for me that I don't really turn off. But where I do kind of accept the more like humanness is just in my day-to-day like personal life, where I have really tried to stop being so hard on myself for not being perfect at everything. And when it comes to like, again, just like living life the way I normally would when I'm working a normal job, I might like cook dinner more. And now maybe I don't do that as much. And that's okay. I'm not going to be so hard on myself for that. And I think, again, I'm not perfect at this. And I definitely am not. It's a constant battle of trying to make sure you have that balance in your personal life and accept yourself as human. But I think that for me, the way I see it is the area in my life that I have more space to be flexible is, again, on things like that, on like my actual like personal time and my personal, again, it's like things like am I going to cook that much, or am I going to buy like a salad bag from the grocery store? So finding those things that you're able to sacrifice on are really helpful. And I know that there are some things that are non-negotiable, and keeping those non-negotiables in your schedule can help you be more human and be more real day to day. The real piece of it that I think every founder is going through, I know I definitely am going through, is just working really hard to not be so hard on yourself. Because no matter what, even if you are doing things right, you're probably feeling like you're not. And that's the humanness that people don't talk about enough. So it's not so much about the actions, but it's about how you internalize, how you see yourself, and how you're feeling as you're going about your day.
What have been the most helpful things for you to try to evolve that talk track for yourself?
Definitely still a work in progress. I will say I am not at all done, and I don't think anyone is ever done with that. There are a couple things that I think keep me going as I'm trying to remind myself that it's okay. One is building a really great and supportive ecosystem of ideally people who understand your situation around you. Whether that's founders, whether that's people that are working in more unstructured roles, maybe they're doing something creative, or maybe they're just people who understand it coming from a corporate role where they also feel that sense of obligation to their job. Whatever it is, having that support system is really helpful. The second thing is, for me, I actually find that taking the time to go for a workout class or anything where it's dark and loud and you really can't like focus on anything except what you're doing there with no phone, that actually is the best for me. That is so, so helpful. I think that can be incredibly calming and grounding. And even though you're taking time away from work, the rest of the hours in the day are so much more productive because your mind is a little more at ease. And then the final one is like just what I'm constantly trying to work on is not being too hard on myself if I'm not doing any of those things and I'm not in a great, and I am just stressed out that day. I don't want to add that additional guilt of being stressed out for that day. So trying to just practice that more positive self-talk that, again, the community around me can help reinforce is really important because all of us are going through it. Every founder I've talked to is going through the same emotional cycle, and having people that you can talk to as your support system is super, super helpful.
Absolutely, especially when so many of us don't have a ton of founder friends when you first start out. So what's the best advice that you can give to those early on in their founder process as they think about how to structure their day, their life, and their relationships?
Yeah, first of all, I think that's such a good point. When you don't have that founder ecosystem, it's really tough. And I will say I didn't have that exactly when I was starting. And I really found my founder friends in New York going to random networking events. So I highly recommend looking at whatever's going on in your city and trying to meet people through there, because I met so many people accidentally, organically, through going to random events alone, which is scary, but worth it, in my opinion. And then the second piece, actually, can you remind me what your second piece was here?
Yeah, how to think about how to structure your life and your schedule and your relationships.
Yeah, this is definitely a tough one. And I think it depends on your personal working style and your team and, you know, your personal situation. What I found really works for me is trying to match normal working hours for when I'm at my desk working like normal. To me, that's kind of like a rough 9 to 6 schedule. And what I've been trying to do as a pretty non-negotiable is taking time to like not ideally eat dinner while working, like go do something, go walk around. That's the kind of flexibility that you have when you're building something on your own that you might not have if you're in consulting. So I really try to make the most of that. And if I need to go log back on later, that's totally fine. But having that time to spend with my partner, with my friends, with family, and not letting sight of what, like, I don't want to lose sight of what actually really matters in life in that process. That has been the most helpful. So if you have any friends that have more standard jobs, trying to kind of match that schedule really helps. And I think it keeps you on a better like sleep schedule also. But I think that at the end of the day, it ends up being really personal. Some people will have boundaries that are really different for themselves. But I think that whatever you decide, as long as you're being deliberate and thoughtful about something that will work for you, that's really all that matters.
We as founders are constantly building in our professional lives, but sometimes our personal lives make it hard to show up as our full selves every day. Things happen, you get sick, a family member passes away, all of the things that life throws at you that you don't necessarily expect. How do you account for the personal side of your life, and how do you make sense of in your head, feeling comfortable enough to step away when you need to?
I think that in my case, especially since, again, it's like a bootstrapped brand, there's a lot more flexibility to step away in cases of emergencies or just if you're going through a tough personal time. It's a bit easier to do that. I think that, again, it comes down to not being so mean to yourself and not so hard on yourself, especially if you're coming from a background where you're an insecure overachiever, where, again, a lot of people that start out in more intense industries right after college tend to be those. I think it's a bit of changing your self-talk to not being so hard on yourself. And I think the other piece is, at the end of the day, like knowing what works for you. I think that different strategies work for different people. For some people, when they're going through something really emotional, it really helps to actually focus on work. And you don't have to feel guilty about it if that's your coping strategy. It's not mine, but it's other people's coping strategy, and that's fine. Other people, it might be taking time to go to therapy for a bit. And I think that's something I highly recommend if you're going through something really tough. Or it might be just taking time for yourself to just go, not think about work, go to the spa, do nothing. Everyone has their own strategy on what they typically do, go to the gym, like whatever it might be. And I think just not being too hard on yourself and taking that time to do whatever you know works for you is really important.
Looking to the future of growth for Seadrop, what are the avenues that you're most excited to continue exploring to try to grow the brand?
Right now, I'm most excited about our retailer partnerships. I can't say anything in detail just yet, but you'll soon see us on shelves. And I think being able to shop Seadrop in person and shop Seadrop online through these retailer partnerships will be really helpful. And I think what I'm also most excited about is actually working really closely with each store that we get stocked in, because the people who really matter and the people who really understand the product are the ones touching all the products every day. They're the ones working in the stores as the sales associates. And what I'm really excited about is spending quality time with them to teach them about what the product is, what the benefits are, since they've probably never seen anything like it, and making sure that the education that we're doing around Seadrop is, again, really high touch, really interesting, and really valuable for everyone involved.
How does Seadrop stand out in a super competitive and loud social media market for skincare?
I think that first, the product itself is so different. Like no one really sees skincare in this format. Like that's just not common. So part of it is we're at a visual advantage. The second piece is, again, on standing out on socials. A lot of it is just getting into those really micro segments that a lot of skincare creators and brands aren't really targeting. And again, for us, that means being the skincare brand that is really targeting nurses, for example. It's a really niche segment that we have a product that solves a lot of pain points for them when they're busy, they're on the go, their skin is dehydrated, if they're wearing masks all day, they're irritated. We've got this product that solves a pain point. But again, we're speaking to consumers in a way that they might not have seen it before, because there is no skincare brand that is pulling out a whole influencer strategy, a whole digital strategy just for nurses. And we're doing this on a whole range of extremely micro specific segments.
We've covered a lot of topics today. Is there anything I haven't asked you that you think would be good for the audience to know?
I would just say if there's anyone here that's in that early phase of starting a company, the best advice I got was talk to someone who is a year or two ahead of you, because there's always someone a year or two ahead of you, no matter what you're building, and they will be the most helpful in giving you actionable advice and not just general strategy. So that's what I have found to be the most helpful. Hopefully, if this is a year or two ahead of what you're building, this was helpful. But that's definitely the best way to get plugged in, get advice, and make your dreams a reality.
Plug yourself. Where can we find you? Where can we find Seadrop? Share it all.
Find Seadrop at Seadrop Skincare on TikTok, on Instagram, and you're more than welcome to reach out to me, Serena Advani, on LinkedIn or on Instagram as well.
Amazing. Okay, Serena, thank you so much. I'm really excited for you and for Seadrop, and I can't wait to see where it continues to grow. And I'm beyond impressed with how much attention and how many rave reviews you have just a year and change into the process. It's amazing.
Thank you so much.